I want to talk to you this afternoon about something that I'm really scared that you all already know about and you already do, which will be brilliant if you do. And as Kate pointed out to me earlier, that's just an affirmation. But it's also something that for about 20 years of my Christian life, I never knew, or I didn't really know. And actually, after Dan asked me to speak, I realised that this is like the most fundamental thing there is as far as I'm concerned. It's the only thing that I could possibly speak about. So it's not the thing for years that I thought I will speak about in my first ever sermon if I do this, but it's so important. And it's about having a conversational intimacy with God. And that sounds quite highfalutin, and it's not my phrase, but it sums up everything I think and I feel about it. And what it means is that conversation bit, that conversational bit, it's just like you have with your closest friends or your partner or whoever, the talking, not just hearing from God. And we talk about hearing from God a lot, but like the actual he talks, I talk, he talks bit, the proper flow between the two of you. And that's where intimacy comes, isn't it? Because actually, if you have somebody who just kind of dives into your life every now and again with a spot of advice, or someone that you just turn to when you're in dire need, well, that's not really an intimate relationship. And God is just calling. And I think even if you have some of that with God, we can always have more. No one has reached the point of Jesus yet, and we can always get more intimate with Him. And even actually, like I was thinking about the conversational intimacy is also when you have that silence between you, and people talk about the silence of God, and I think that's used in like a negative way, but what if we can have a silence with us and God, like you do with your closest friend, where actually it's like a loving silence. You're both so okay with that, and you are just together, and it's only a silence you can have with like long, loving old friends and old companions, and it's with the people who know you the best and that you know the best. And I just think in each of us there is that craving for this conversational intimacy with God. And actually in every human being it's there, I'm sure of it. And we are only going to give it to anyone else if we have it ourselves. And if I'm really honest, I didn't have it. Like, I walked obediently with God, or fairly obediently with God, for a long time. Well, 20 years is quite a long time. But I didn't have like the abundant life, not really. I'd hear stuff like that and be like, oh, what did that really mean? Or the whole kind of, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And you're like, really? Because this isn't what I'm feeling here. And yet I know your word is true, but this isn't what's happening. And all those things. And there's a verse that I think we use quite a lot. And to be honest, I'm beginning to unravel that a lot of the Bible I never really got, if I'm honest, even though I studied it and things. And there's a verse in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 17. And I'm going to jump around a lot, so it's probably not worth trying to kind of follow it too much. But it just says, pray continually. And I was like, for a long time, even though people talk about prayer being this two-way conversation, I've heard people say that a lot, I didn't really live it. And when I hear people say pray continually, there was a bit in my mind that meant like I kind of had to pray for things continually. So if I heard Ted was ill, then I had to pray all the time about the fact Ted was ill. But that was me talking all the time about the fact Ted was ill. And that's not a two-way thing. And actually also, as you know, I'm not the world's most talkative person. If you get me going, I can be. And so actually the thought of talking all the time is really, I can't do that. That's just not going to happen. And that's not an intimate relationship either if I just kind of bend God's ear all the time. I don't, that's not how I am. So it didn't make sense to me. But then if pray continually, actually means just being with Him continually. And hearing His voice continually, and having the freedom to talk to Him continually. Then that's something different, that's something I want and I crave, and actually that takes the pressure of all the other people I know, particularly Adam, to be that person that hears that stuff continually. Because Adam can't take all my stuff, and even my female friends can't take all my stuff, but God can, and God invites it. And the verses that like kind of really were one day pointed out to me and made me really realise the truth of it are in John. Yeah, shall I go with that? No, actually I changed my mind. And for all those years I'd really stuck by the Bible as best as I could. But I've come to the realisation that I think a lot of people, including people who are not in church, see the Bible as a manual. And it's not a bad place to start. It's not there's a lot of good you can get out of seeing the Bible as a manual, and we use terms like the Beauty Bible and stuff like that, and it just means the highest authority sort of on this thing. And that's not bad going, but it doesn't match with this whole concept of living word. And also, this is maybe a dodgy thing to say in a church, but it is open to interpretation if you just take it, because you take your slant on it. Yeah. Just for example, recently I've realised when I read the words of Jesus, I often just hear this monologue, this kind of drone, and that's not how Jesus spoke, is it? Like, you wouldn't know, all these people wouldn't have gone and heard this man who must have been very charismatic if actually it was just this drone, but I put my slant on it. And so, like, the Bible can't just be a manual for living by, not if it's the living word. And I also have this problem that I would hear people talk about God told them to do stuff, but in general I would always say, well, I saw God in hindsight. I knew he was there and I trusted him, but to my mind he was there in hindsight. So yeah, this is what he did. And so in honesty, although I never put it this way, I saw God as the great chess player in the sky. And that is an intimacy again, and that isn't actually what he wants to be seen as. I really don't think, but that's what I was seeing. And I was obediently seeing it, and I loved God, and it got me through my teenage years quite unscathed, really, and all that. So it wasn't bad, but it wasn't the best. And I think God is calling us to the best. He always is. But the best might not always look like what we think it does. But it does look like intimacy with him. It does look like knowing him. Otherwise, all of this is pointless. Yeah. And we're just not here for pointless. So anyway, there's these verses in John 10. So it says, the man who enters by the gate is the shepherd of his sheep. The watchman opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognise a stranger's voice. And there's another bit down here. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of the sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice. And then verse 27 is, my sheep listen to my voice. I know them, and they follow me. And I've read that so many times before, because it's one of those verses used loads, isn't it? But it suddenly occurred to me one day that, like, if I'm his sheep, then this says that, like, he speaks. So if I believe I'm his sheep, then I believe the Bible, I have to believe that he speaks. And I also have to step out and trust a little bit of myself as well, that I know his voice. It says that I don't need to be scared of this knowing his voice. I really do. Because I think a lot of us are like, well, how do I know it's his voice and not me? And how can I trust that? And it means you sort of stay in this safe boundaries of what we all think the Bible might be telling us to do, or what we all think God might be telling us to do. So I have to trust that voice is his. And there are loads of examples in the Bible, loads of examples. And I've just kind of picked out two that I felt God was kind of leading me to. So there's just, and this one I think will be familiar to most people. But in 1 Samuel chapter 3 and we'll start at verse 1. It's quite a long bit, but I think it's worth going through. So it says, the boy Samuel ministered before the Lord under Eli. In those days the word of the Lord was rare. There was not many visions. One night Eli, whose eyes were becoming so weak that he could barely see, was lying down in his usual place. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called Samuel. Samuel answered, here I am, and he ran to Eli and said, here I am, you called me. But Eli said, I did not call. Go back and lie down. So he went and lay down. Again the Lord called Samuel. And Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, here I am, you called me. My son, Eli said, I did not call. Go back and lie down. Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord. The word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. The Lord called Samuel a third time, and Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, here I am, you called me. Then Eli realised that the Lord was calling the boy. So Eli told Samuel, go and lie down, and if he calls you, say, speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. So Samuel went and lay down at his place. The Lord came and stood there, calling, as at the other times, Samuel, Samuel. Then Samuel said, speak, for your servant is listening. And like that, it's just amazing. Like, I know you probably have heard that before, but it's just amazing to think actually God was really calling him. And I'm quite jealous of Samuel, if I'm honest, that he picked it up quite quickly. It only took him 4 attempts to hear God's voice there. But And he answered though. God spoke and he answered, and it didn't even hit me before. It just hit me then. It said, the Lord came and stood there. And there's a bit of me that just craves that closeness.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if I'll get to see God this side of heaven. And at the moment, I don't hear an audible voice. But I would love to. And I don't think there's anything wrong. Going by the Bible, I don't think there's anything wrong with that craving in me to have that intimacy so close for all of us to go for.
Yes.
So that's what really stands out for me there. That he just, God called and he answered. And then it opens up, and then God tells him loads of stuff as well. It's not even just this tiny little, Samuel had a feeling God was hinting that this kind of thing was going to happen. And it's like in detail, and it's just amazing. And this one, let that go. And then the next one is in Samuel. It's a lot shorter, chapter 2, verses 1 to 2. And this is David, and it just says, in the course of time, David inquired of the Lord, shall I go up to one of the towns of Judah? He asked, the Lord said, go up. David asked, where shall I go? To Hebron, the Lord answered. So David went up there and his 2 wives. And I just think that is brilliant. It's just like, David said, shall I go? God says, go. Yeah. David says, where? And God says, Hebron. And it's just like, it's that flow of conversation. And also there's the whole thing of David was obedient and went, which is a whole another thing to talk about, whether you're obedient when you've heard. But they had that conversation. David didn't get this kind of feeling. Yeah. David didn't get a hint. David didn't sit around and wait. Also, David asked and expected an answer and heard an answer. And then he kept it in the flow going. He didn't then go, he didn't say, shall I go up to one of the towns of Judah? And God said, go up. So David was like, oh, I've got my map. I'll go through that one. He asked the next question. And I just think it's brilliant. And David was called a man after God's own heart. Yeah. And actually, I think about this. I think God isn't just after David to be the man after God's own heart. And I suppose you could say Jesus was the man after God's own heart as well as being God. But he wants all of us to be men and women after his own heart. Amen. And I think that is a real example of how we get there. Because you need some way of getting there. And I think that some people, there is a risk with this, isn't there? There is a risk of hearing from God because so much bad has been done in the name of people hearing from God, and I'm aware of that, and I don't know what the Crusades were about, and I don't understand the whole stuff in Northern Ireland or any of those things. I have no idea, but I don't think that means we don't aim for it. And I mean, I don't know how they can justify some things, because God is never going to tell you to kill someone. I'm convinced of that. God is not going to tell you to commit adultery. He's not going to tell you to go and rob something. He's not going to go against his word in the Bible, but he's still going to speak. He still wants that intimacy, and I really believe that. I really, really strongly. And I thought, well, okay, so the Bible is full of God speaking, so it's either God being really cruel to the Bible and teasing us. It's either God like some sort of 80s game show host going, here's what you could have had you been these people here, but you don't get it. You don't get that prize. I felt I don't believe God acts like that. I don't believe that that's what he wants anymore. And also, actually, if that's how God acted, he would be inviting the devil in, because we can make all sorts of agreements about, well, I'm not good enough then because God doesn't do this, and I'm not this, and I'm not that. And God isn't after us making agreements with the devil. So it must be like an invitation. It must be a call that this is what you can have. You can have those daily conversations with David. And that's what that's kind of the real thrust of what I want to say here today. And then there's this other slight issue with all of this as well that gets confusing, because I think the first verse, when Daniel had asked me to come and to speak, the first verse God, and I knew it was kind of about this, but the first verse God gave me was this. It's Hosea chapter 1 verse 2, and it says, when the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, go, take to yourself an adulterous wife and children of unfaithfulness. And in the Message Bible, which is what I was reading, it basically says, the first time God spoke to Hosea, he said, go and take a wife who is a prostitute and have her children. And I just read over and over that, because actually, if that was the first time God spoke to Hosea and Hosea acted on it, that's kind of, Hosea trusted that he heard the voice of the Lord, because that's kind of biggie, I think. That's kind of a big thing to be asked. And also, it was totally different to what the other prophets had been told to do. And I have this big suspicion that it wasn't something that the people of that time, the religious people of that time, the people that said they followed God, I don't think they'd have advised it. I think if they'd have gone up to one of the others and let's weigh this up here. Does God say this? they'd have probably said, no, you're not hearing from God.
Yeah.
But actually God said it, and
Amen.
this isn't me saying go out and do something wacky and claim it was God. It's really not. But I just think sometimes we have to trust that God did say it. And if we miss that whole book of Hosea, we would miss that, like what I'm talking about, really, the aching of God's heart to get us back. And so it wasn't easy for Hosea, but he obviously was the man for the job, and God knew that, and God spoke to him, and Hosea did it. And he didn't trust in the other stuff that we think is us with God, and he didn't trust in the religious. And actually the bit for us, which Hosea didn't get, but the bit that really backs that up, is how Jesus was. Like, I couldn't find my verses when I was looking, but I know it says that Jesus got called a drunkard. Like, he wasn't what they were expecting. They were expecting either this victorious, this kind of great king to come and get rid of the Romans and all that, or they were at least expecting someone who looked a bit religious. And they didn't get either of those things in Jesus. And of course he was hearing from God. Of course, above anyone else, he had conversational intimacy with God. And I just think we have to be aware of that as well. And even like, if you think of John the Baptist, who was around at Jesus' time, they looked totally different, but they were hearing from God. They were acting on what they heard. So it doesn't have to be what someone else looks like at all. And for me personally, this is this massive challenge. I was thinking about it, because I quite like resting in like, well, the Bible says this, and this is my safety net, this is my safe place. But I also have this niggling fear in the back of my head that when I die and they put up my epitaph, or whatever it's called, Alison can tell me, that it will say, here lies Adelaide, she was a nice person. And I have this fear of just being a nice person. and there's nothing wrong with that, but it just really, I think, goodness, if I don't step out like Hosea, if that's all Hosea was, he was one of the nice guys who married the nice lady, like we miss out so massively on the heart of God. So that's my kind of, that's my real heart today, that perhaps we have to challenge ourselves and not miss out on the heart of God. And then with this, I was thinking, I don't want to leave it just that. I want to, sometimes, a lot of the time, we hear people fling words around like hearing from God, and even I could leave you with this conversational intimacy idea, and that's all nice. But I think you do need something practical, because you need to walk away and know, what does this actually look like in someone's life? And most of the time, I lean away from the whole 5 steps to holiness, 10 steps to a great marriage thing. And like, they're helpful, but it doesn't suit my personality, and it doesn't kind of work. But today I'm going to make a slight exception, and I'm going to kind of just unravel what I started doing to hear from God. And it's because like, I read it in a book. This isn't my thing, right? But it was what someone else did, and I just thought, well, I desperately want this. I want to speak to God like that. So this is what he did, and this is what I did. So I just wanted to kind of unravel it a little bit, because it just might open some doors, I think. So the place I would start, or the place I started, and I still do, is asking God questions that are not really emotionally charged for me. So I didn't start, and actually this was after Adam and I were married anyway, but I didn't start with the whole like, should I marry Adam? Or I didn't start with, should I divorce Adam? Or I didn't start with any of this, do I jack in my job and go and do this thing? I didn't start with any of that massive stuff. I just started on the small bits. Because actually the small bits, for most of us, are also what make up your life anyway. Really, it's not all this excitement and adventure and changing jobs and stuff. So I started with just things like even, where shall I shop today? Because God knows where the bargains are before I step off in the car. Like, I have no evidence, I have to say, that I knew that, I don't know, Sainsbury's was going to be better than Morrison's that week or whatever. I can't tell. I have no huge stories where I missed a car crash and all that because I've done this. But I think people do, but I don't. But I'm trusting God that he knew anyway. So I would ask him those questions, and I would ask him things for a yes or no answer, because it's easier to hear yes or no, I think, to begin with. So do I go to Sainsbury's? Yes or no? And I would act on what the answer was. And then I might go to ask the next question, because I might say, do I go to Sainsbury's? And you hear like a no, something like, okay, well, we've got a shop. Do I go to Sainsbury's tomorrow then? And like, if he says yes, I go to Sainsbury's tomorrow. And like I say, a lot of the time I don't know whether that's right or wrong, but it's just practicing. It's just practicing hearing him. And actually, it is the way I would talk to Adam. We would weigh up what to do in our week. So why don't I talk to God like that? So I just start with those small things and ask him the next question. And like the one that I feel it's got in my heart to kind of bring out is I also do it, and this is a slightly bigger issue, but I do it with stuff, and he knows what I'm going to say, it's between Adam and I, you know, like, they'll do something that winds you up. And it's probably like a niggly thing, but and it could be a friend even, it doesn't have to be a partner, but they do something that winds you up, and I will now, most of the time, go to God and say, do I raise this, Adam? And if God says no, then I bite my tongue. Like Adam, actually, I was telling him last night, I've missed loads of ear bashings because God has said no. So, you know, it's a good one. It's a good one, I think. But sometimes he says yes, and if he says yes, then you have to rein it in though still and ask that next question, and I ask when. And usually it's something like after he's eaten. Or, you know, that sort of thing. It's common sense. But God knows. God knows if Adam can take it that day. He might say, no, leave him alone. Ask him next week about this thing. And actually, for me, that is what that threefold cord of marriage looks like, which is another thing that gets flung around the church. And you're like, well, what does that mean? Does it mean we just like spurl out all this stuff about our marriage to God, but don't think, and that is meant to be a threefold cord that holds our marriage together, but it doesn't feel much like it a lot of the time. Really reading the Bible together, is that just going to miraculously do this thing? I want God right in it, and this is the best way I've found thus far to have God right in my marriage, to actually ask him about this stuff, ask him about what I do about it. So that's kind of, and then you can get to kind of bigger questions. When you start hearing him, then you can move on to that stuff and start trusting it. But it's only when you started trusting in those little things. And this kind of raised also a soapbox in my head a bit, because I know sometimes people say, oh, that person over-spiritualises this, and they over-spiritualise that. And I am just, and this is only my opinion, I don't have a Bible verse for it, but I am not sure we can over-spiritualise anything. Really? If we're intimate with God, does anything count as over-spiritualising? Can I overly allow Adam in my life? I can over-pressurise him in my life, but I'm not sure I can over-fill him in, really, if we're meant to be that close. So with God, surely it's got to be more than that, I think. And so I'm not convinced you can over-spiritualise. And there have been occasions when I've asked God stuff, and I believe I've heard, like, you choose. Do what you want to do today. But I would rather hear that than not ask the question. And I'm not at the point where I ask him everything yet, or where I just talk to him about everything yet. But I have to say that these, like, maybe 5 years where I've started stepping out of this a bit have been a lot more abundant. Just my internal abundance has been a lot more. Even if my external abundance hasn't, who cares? But my internal abundance has been so much more. My yoke has been so much easier. My burden has been so much lighter. And all that stuff has become so much more real because I've started doing this. So I'm not convinced you can over-spiritualise, but that's just my thinking on it. And then there's another area, because I think I've just about got time, that I just want to touch on listening to God. And really this is a whole another topic of conversation. But it's so important, I thought I just can't leave it out, because it's made such a massive difference to me recently. And in this conversational intimacy, it's invite God in for that healing. And healing is another thing we talk about a lot, and invite God to heal us. And I'm talking more about emotional healing than physical healing. And the one example I will give at the moment, because I think that's enough really, is, you know, when you have situations and you get like an over-emotional response to it, and you don't know what that's about. So like, it could be like just in the supermarket and someone, I know what that happened the other day, and I can't totally tell you what God's doing with this one, but Adam poked me the other day, and I really went for him. I didn't ask God what to do, and it was stupid. I don't know why it irritated. He was only trying to get my attention, but I didn't like being poked, and that was stupid. It was an over-emotional response, but that shows something that's broken in me. That shows us something that's a bit wonky. I think, you know, these small things, they make us up, don't they? And in that moment, I think you have to step back if you're aware of that, and you can start to train yourself, and you start to notice when this happens. And I just say to Jesus, and I think it's helpful sometimes just to say out loud what you literally, and I just literally say to him, like, Jesus, come into this, or Jesus, what is this about, or Jesus, where did this come from? And he will take my mind back to where that thing has come from, to the original source. Or he might take back to one of the things that have come from, and then a few days later he'll prompt me again and give me another memory. And he starts to unravel, and then I will just ask Jesus into that. Or if I need to ask him to forgive because I've had this strange response. Or sometimes, more recently, God has been taking me through memories of things that maybe happened at primary school or at secondary school, and has made me start to realise that those guys, like at 32, I'm beginning to realise that those people were just children. At long last, I'm working out that they were just children and they didn't need to do what they did. And actually, I probably interpreted a lot of that stuff wrongly anyway. But it means that then you can, okay, so you've asked Jesus in, Jesus has healed your bit, and then I can ask Jesus to bless them wherever they are now. And it's changed so much. Like I still have my fiery moments and my over-emotional moments and all those things. But so much healing has come through asking Jesus into those things. And it's that simple. And I think we can overcomplicate it, and it is just Jesus coming. And if you get into the habit of practicing that, as much as that happens, because I think sometimes that can happen on a daily basis for me, when those emotions arise. And if you can just get in this habit of always asking him in, and remembering that it's not too big and he wants to go to those places. And we are only, like Daniel was talking about the vision, but we are only going to really be able to go out and reach people, I think, when we have something to properly offer them. And when we have been, like we're not going to be in a perfect place, but when we have enough healing to really go out and offer them that themselves. So that's kind of, that's really, I'm going to leave that one there for now. So that is to me the beginnings of conversational intimacy. If you can just start, and not just, you might already do this, but if you don't, I really encourage you to leave this place today and just start asking him the little stuff and listening. And I think it's helpful as well, like I'm sure, I haven't asked anyone else about this, but I am sure God talks in slightly different ways to different people. Like I know some people, Adam has had pictures, and I know other people have pictures. I've never had a picture, so I'm not sure what bit of you that kind of feels like it comes from, if that makes sense. But I know for me, what I hear is like nearly an audible voice, and I do crave that audible voice, but it's nearly, but it's sort of behind all the layers of myself. When I set myself down, I hear it in me, which I assume is where the Holy Spirit resides. But but that's where I'm hearing him, and I guess other people will hear him in a different place. But that's, if that helps to identify the voice, that's where I hear it from. And so I just thought to finish really, I would like us to pray, but I don't want us, it's going to be I should have checked with Daniel really, but it's going to be a freedom in that prayer. So it's not going to be, I'm not going to sit here and talk, that's my deal with you. I'm going to get Adam to play something, just because silence can be like uncomfortable or whatever. And I just want you to pray yourself, and if you feel you've got something to pray out loud, please pray out loud. If you want to ask God a question from the church, I thought, we're in a really safe place here, we can do that and listen for an answer. But I just wanted to give us a moment to kind of hear what he has to say on it all.